My husband completely ruined my first Mother's Day. He didn't plan anything, didn't even say thank you. So when Father's Day came, I stayed silent and did nothing. Now he's yelling, telling everyone I'm cold and immature. But after what he did, why should I celebrate him? This weekend, I told my husband I don't want to be married to him anymore. Not because of some huge fight, or cheating, or screaming matches. It was quiet. It was painful. And it was the result of 1,000 tiny cuts that started long before we ever said I do. You see, I was devastated when he ruined my first Mother's Day. But what really broke me wasn't the day itself. It was the realization that I've been second place in my own marriage, for years. Second to his mother. Second to her needs, her feelings, her constant presence in our life. From our wedding to our honeymoon to even our son's birth. She's been there, taking up space that should have been ours. And he let her. I sat across from him and said, if this doesn't change, if you don't choose us, then I'm walking away before I end up hating you. And in that moment, he cried. And for the first time, I think he actually heard me. But now, I'm scared. Because I don't know if anything will really change. Honey, I know I messed up on Mother's Day, Dave said, his eyes dropping to the floor, avoiding the storm clouds in Rachel's gaze. But you know how Mom gets when she's worried about Dad. Rachel took a deep breath, her arms folded tight across her chest. She'd been waiting for this moment. The moment when Dave would finally acknowledge her pain. Dave, it's not just Mother's Day, she began, her voice steady, yet laced with a hint of anger. It's every holiday, every special occasion, every single time we try to do something as a family. Dave looked up, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? Your mom, Rachel said, her voice tightening, always manages to make everything about her. Our honeymoon, my pregnancy, even our son's birth. It's like she can't stand the idea of not being the center of attention. Dave sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. I know she can be overbearing, but she just wants what's best for us. And for Dad, you know how much she worries. But what about what's best for us? Rachel's voice grew stronger. Her eyes searched his. What about what's best for me? For our son? Dave didn't have an answer, and Rachel didn't wait for one. She knew what she had to say next would be hard, but it was a conversation they'd been avoiding for too long. If things don't change, if you don't start putting me and our son first, I don't know if I can stay married to you. Summary to the power of 1: Rachel confronts Dave about his mother's intrusive behavior on Mother's Day and previous occasions, expressing her pain and frustration. She warns him that if he doesn't set boundaries with his mom, their marriage may not survive. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with tension and unspoken resentments. Rachel had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but after years of feeling like an afterthought in her own marriage, she had reached her breaking point. I'm sorry, Dave finally whispered, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I just didn't know how to handle it. Rachel's heart softened a bit, but she knew that sorry wasn't enough. I need you to understand, Dave, she said, her voice quivering. Your mom can't control our lives anymore. If we don't set boundaries now, it'll just get worse. Dave nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I know, he murmured, but she's my mom, and I love her. How can I just cut her out? I'm not asking you to cut her out, Rachel clarified, reaching out to gently touch his arm. But we need to make our family, our marriage, our priority. And if she can't respect that, then we have to figure out a way to deal with it. The room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the moments that seemed to stretch on forever. Rachel could see the wheels turning in Dave's head, the weight of the decision before him. Finally, he took a deep breath and met her gaze. Okay, he said firmly. I'll talk to her. We'll figure this out together. The relief washed over Rachel like a cool breeze, but she knew this was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead of them, filled with potential arguments, hurt feelings, and maybe even tears. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were on the same page, ready to fight for their family. The next day, Dave called his mom, his hand shaking as he dialed the number. Rachel watched from the kitchen, her heart in her throat. It was a conversation they both knew was necessary, but one that neither of them had ever anticipated having. Mom, Dave began, his voice strained. Rachel and I had a long talk, and we need to set some boundaries. It's nothing against you, but we need to prioritize our little family. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and Rachel could almost feel the tension coiling around her husband. But Dave took a deep breath and continued, laying out their new rules with a firm but loving tone. Rachel knew it was hard for him, but she was proud of his resolve. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Rachel watched as the change took hold. Dave started saying no to his mom's constant demands, and Rachel felt a newfound respect for her husband. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of awkward moments, but the air in their home grew lighter with each passing day. And when Father's Day came around, Rachel made sure to plan something special for Dave, just the three of them. She hoped that this small act would be the start of a new tradition, one where she and her husband could celebrate without the shadow of his mother's expectations looming over them. As they sat down to a homemade breakfast in bed, Rachel looked at her husband and son, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to happiness, together. But the calm didn't last. The following week, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her mother-in-law, inviting herself and her husband over for dinner. Rachel's heart sank. She had hoped Dave would have told her about the conversation with his mom, but apparently, he hadn't. When Dave saw the text, his eyes widened, and Rachel knew he was torn between his love for his mother and his commitment to their new boundaries. "You can't just ignore her," he said, his voice strained. Rachel took his hand firmly in hers. "We agreed to this, Dave. We're a team. If she doesn't respect our boundaries, she doesn't get to be part of our lives." Dave nodded, took a deep breath, and responded to the text with a polite decline, explaining that they had plans as a family. Rachel felt a twinge of pride in her husband's courage. The days leading up to the next family gathering, Rachel noticed a change in Dave's demeanor. He was more present with her and their son, more attentive to their needs. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and Rachel couldn't help but feel hopeful. But when the day came, Rachel could feel the tension in the air as they arrived at her in-law's house. Her mother-in-law greeted them with a forced smile, and Rachel knew that their conversation hadn't been forgotten. As the dinner progressed, Rachel watched Dave carefully, waiting for the moment when he would stand up for their family, and when it came, it was subtle but clear. His mother tried to take over the conversation, to steer it towards her own concerns, but Dave gently redirected it back to Rachel and their son. Rachel's heart swelled with love for him. The evening ended with a tense goodbye, but Rachel knew that they had made progress. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but they were taking the first steps towards reclaiming their life. As they drove home, Rachel leaned over and kissed Dave's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trying." Dave took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're in this together," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll always have your back." And Rachel knew that with that simple promise, they could conquer any storm that came their way. Over the next few months, Rachel and Dave worked tirelessly to establish their new boundaries. It wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments when Rachel would catch Dave slipping into old patterns, and Rachel herself had to learn to communicate her needs more effectively. But with each small victory, their relationship grew stronger. Rachel noticed a shift in the dynamics with her in-laws, too. They began to realize that their son and daughter-in-law had a life of their own, one that didn't revolve solely around them. One evening, Rachel found Dave staring at the fridge, a sad look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, wrapping her arms around his waist. "It's just," he began, "I miss being able to call Mom every day, to tell her about work or just to chat." Rachel nodded in understanding. "But she has to respect us, Dave. Maybe we can find a balance." They talked it through, and the next day, Rachel suggested a weekly call with his parents, a set time where they could all catch up without the drama. It was a compromise, but one that felt right. The call went better than Rachel had hoped. Sure, there were moments of tension, but for the most part, it was filled with laughter and stories about their son's latest antics. Rachel could feel the tension in the room ease, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was a part of the conversation rather than a silent observer. As they ended the call, Rachel turned to Dave with a smile. "See? It's not about cutting her out, it's about creating space for us." Dave returned her smile, a hint of relief in his eyes. "You're right," he said, pulling her into a hug. "We can do this." The weeks turned into months, and Rachel and Dave's marriage grew more solid with each passing day. They started to plan vacations together, just the three of them, and Rachel felt a sense of joy that she hadn't felt in years. But as their son grew and started school, Rachel began to feel the pull of her own career aspirations. She had put her dreams on hold to focus on their family, and now she yearned for something more. Dave, ever the supportive partner, encouraged her to go back to school, to chase her dreams. Their lives grew busier, but their love for each other remained steadfast. Rachel knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges to face. But with Dave by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. And when Rachel's mother-in-law called, unannounced, Rachel didn't feel the same anger that she once had. Instead, she took a deep breath, thought of the boundaries they had set, and reminded herself that she had a voice, a say in her own life. "We'd love to see you," Rachel said, her voice calm and measured, "but we have a very busy weekend planned. How about we schedule something for next week?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Rachel could almost hear the wheels turning. But then, to her surprise, her mother-in-law's voice softened. "All right, Rachel, next week it is." Rachel felt a sense of triumph, and the tension in her shoulders melted away. They had set a boundary, and it had been respected. The weekend passed, filled with the laughter of their son and the comfort of their newfound routine. Rachel cherished the moments of quiet she and Dave had stolen together, moments that had once been overshadowed by the constant demands of his parents. On Sunday evening, as Rachel was preparing dinner, Dave walked into the kitchen, a look of concern etched on his face. "Mom called," he said. "Dad had a small health scare. They're okay, but she's really upset." Rachel's heart went out to her husband, and she immediately put aside her plans for the night. "Let's go see them," she said, setting down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "We can reschedule our weekend." Dave's eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of resentment. "Are you sure?" he asked, hopeful. "I'm sure," Rachel responded, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "They're your family, and we're there for each other." When they arrived, Rachel could see the worry lines etched into her mother-in-law's face, and she felt a pang of compassion. She realized that while setting boundaries was necessary, it didn't mean she had to be cold or uncaring. Rachel stepped forward, offering comfort and support, and was surprised when her mother-in-law accepted it with a small nod of thanks. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel noticed that their relationship with her in-laws had evolved. The boundaries had created a space where love and respect could grow. They still had their moments, but they were fewer and farther between. Rachel even found herself looking forward to the weekly calls, sharing stories of their son's growth and her own successes at school. One evening, as Rachel was studying for an upcoming exam, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. "How's it going?" Dave asked, peering over her book. Rachel leaned back, rubbing her eyes. "Good," she said, smiling up at him. "Just a bit tired." "You know," Dave began, his voice tentative, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how we need to make our family our priority." Rachel's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what was coming. "I think," he continued, "that we should start planning for our future. Maybe look into buying a house, giving our son a proper place to grow up." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man she'd almost lost to his own guilt and fear. "I'd like that," she said, her voice filled with hope. They spent the next hour scrolling through real estate listings, their son playing contentedly at their feet. Rachel felt the warmth of Dave's hand in hers, a silent promise of a future filled with love, compromise, and the occasional battle with overbearing in-laws. As they tucked their son into bed, Rachel knew that they had come a long way since that fateful Mother's Day. They had faced their demons and come out stronger for it. And as she laid her head on the pillow, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the man who had finally learned to stand up for their family. The next weekend, Rachel was surprised to receive a call from her mother-in-law, asking if they could meet for lunch, just the two of them. Rachel agreed, feeling a mix of trepidation and hope. As they sat in the quiet restaurant, the woman across from her didn't look like the controlling force of nature Rachel had grown accustomed to. She looked small, frail even. "Rachel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to apologize to you. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I've been acting. And the truth is, I see it now. I see that I've been putting too much pressure on Dave and interfering in your life." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. She had never heard such a genuine admission from her mother-in-law before. "When your father had his health scare," she continued, "it really made me realize how short life is and how much I've taken for granted. I don't want to lose my son or my grandson, and I certainly don't want to lose you." Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she reached out to take her mother-in-law's hand. "I know you love us," Rachel said softly, "but sometimes love needs boundaries." Her mother-in-law nodded, squeezing Rachel's hand. "You're right," she said. "I've been so focused on keeping my family close that I didn't see how much I was pushing you away." The apology was the first step in a long road to repairing their relationship. Rachel knew it wouldn't be perfect, that there would be bumps along the way, but she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The weeks that followed brought changes both subtle and profound. Rachel noticed her mother-in-law taking a step back, allowing them to plan and enjoy their own family moments without interference. And when Rachel did reach out for help or advice, she received it with grace and without judgment. One evening, Rachel received a bouquet of flowers at the door, with a card that simply read, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I'm learning." Rachel read it, her heart swelling with love and hope. As they sat down to dinner, Rachel looked at her husband, who had grown into a more confident and decisive man. "You know," she said, "I think your mom's really trying." Dave looked up from his plate, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," he said, "I think she is." Their son looked up at them, his eyes bright with curiosity. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing the shift in the air. "Grandma's just being really nice to us," Rachel said, her voice filled with warmth. "We're all learning to get along better." The little boy beamed, his world just a bit more stable. Rachel felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace she hadn't known since before the chaos of their blended family life had begun. And as they sat around the table, sharing stories and laughter, Rachel knew that they had turned a corner. The storm had passed, and they had come out the other side, a family united by love, respect, and the knowledge that sometimes you had to fight for what truly mattered. As Rachel watched her son play with his grandmother, she noticed a newfound ease between them. The therapy her mother-in-law had started attending had made a difference, not just in her behavior, but in the way she saw Rachel and Dave as a unit. Rachel felt a warmth in her heart, a warmth she had feared was lost forever. The conversations between Rachel and her mother-in-law grew less about control and more about genuine care and concern. Rachel began to see the woman she had married into not as an adversary, but as a woman who had made mistakes and was now striving to be better, to be a part of their lives in a healthy way. It was a slow process, filled with awkward moments and occasional missteps, but with each step forward, Rachel felt the tension between them ease, and in its place, a tentative bond began to form. They weren't best friends, but they were finding their way to a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual understanding and respect. And so, as the seasons changed and their son grew, Rachel and Dave's marriage grew stronger with each passing day. They had faced the storm and come out the other side, weathered but not broken. Rachel had learned that setting boundaries wasn't about cutting people out, but about creating a space where love could truly flourish, without the weight of expectations and manipulation. Dave's parents had become more than just in-laws. They had become part of their son's life in a way that honored Rachel's role as his wife and mother. Rachel had learned that she didn't have to be the villain, that she could stand firm in her love for her husband and son without sacrificing her own needs and desires. As they watched their son play in the yard, Rachel leaned into Dave, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for fighting for us." Dave wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Always," he said. "We're in this together." And Rachel knew, with every fiber of her being, that they were. Together, they had turned a painful chapter in their lives into a beautiful story of growth, love, and the power of setting boundaries. It was a story she was proud to be a part of, and one she knew would shape their future as a family.